Charlie had always dreamed of owning his own land. He wasn't a man of many desires, but the thought of having a little piece of the world where he could escape, work hard, and build something of his own had always appealed to him. After working in a local factory for years, he had saved up just enough money to buy a small property. The dream seemed so simple. Maybe a small house, a little garden, and some quiet time alone. He didn't need anything grand, just something that felt like home. One day, while flipping through the local newspaper at a small diner, Charlie's eyes landed on an advertisement. It was a tiny, almost forgotten line printed in small text, "Shack for sale, 10. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he had read it wrong. A shack for just $10? The ad was so strange that he thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was an old listing or a scam, but something about it intrigued him. He decided to take a drive and check it out. If anything, he could at least see what kind of shack would go for so little. The address was just a few miles out of town, tucked away in a remote area. Charlie was no stranger to country roads, so he didn't mind the drive. He thought it would be a simple, quick look, just out of curiosity. As he neared the location, he started to see signs of a dilapidated area. The road narrowed, turning into a gravel path. The land around it looked overgrown, wild weeds and tall grass covering parts of the way. He felt a twinge of doubt but continued on. The small wooden shack finally appeared ahead, looking like it had been abandoned for years. It was small, weather-beaten, and hardly looked like it could be lived in. When Charlie stepped out of his truck, he felt the silence of the place. There were no sounds of nearby traffic or people. It felt like the kind of place where time had forgotten. The shack was old, with peeling paint and boards that creaked in the wind. Yet for some reason, Charlie felt a strange pull. He could picture himself here, the quiet, the solitude. It was exactly what he had been looking for. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. After a few moments, a woman appeared from the back of the house. She was older, wearing a worn apron, and looked surprised to see him.
"Can I help you?"
she asked, eyeing him carefully. "I saw the ad in the paper," Charlie said, stepping forward. "The shack for sale." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're interested in this place?" "It's in pretty bad shape," Charlie nodded. He wasn't scared of hard work. He had been fixing things all his life, and this shack seemed like the kind of project he'd enjoy. He wasn't looking for something perfect. He just wanted a place where he could spend his days, fix it up, and live simply. "Can I take a look inside?" Charlie asked. The woman hesitated but then nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The door creaked open, revealing the inside. The air inside smelled musty, and the wooden floorboards groaned under his feet. The walls were cracked, and there was a fireplace in the corner covered in soot. A few broken windows let in the sunlight, and dust floated in the air. The room was small, with just enough space for a bed, a table, and a few chairs. It wasn't much, but Charlie wasn't expecting much. He could see it in his mind, though, how it could be a home. He could fix the walls, put in new windows, maybe even build a little garden outside. It would take work, but Charlie had always found peace in hard work. "I'll take it," Charlie said. The woman didn't seem to react immediately, so he repeated, "I'll take it." "How much do you want for it?" She paused for a moment, still sizing him up. "It's yours for $10, she said, as if that was the easiest thing in the world. Charlie was stunned. He had expected her to say a few hundred or at least a couple of thousand. $10? It almost seemed too good to be true. "You serious?" he asked. The woman nodded. "It's all yours if you want it. There's nothing else here. You can have it. I just need it gone." Charlie didn't waste time asking more questions. $10 wasn't much, and even if the shack was in terrible shape, it was still land. The land alone was worth it. Plus, it was as quiet as he had hoped. He pulled out his wallet, handed over the $10 bill, and just like that, the shack was his. No paperwork, no contracts. Just an exchange and a promise to fix it up. Charlie felt a rush of excitement. He was a homeowner now, not in the way he had imagined, but it was his. That day, Charlie got to work right away. He returned to town, picked up some basic tools, and came back to the shack to start clearing it out. There were piles of old junk in the back, broken furniture and remnants of past lives that had lived in the shack. As he swept the floor and started sorting through the debris, he could almost picture how the shack could come to life with a little effort. But as the sun started setting, Charlie couldn't shake the strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. Something about the place felt off, like there was something he hadn't noticed. but he shook it off. He had a lot of work ahead of him, and there was no time to second-guess himself. That night, Charlie slept in the shack for the first time. The bed was rough, the blankets thin, but he felt content. The quiet, the solitude, it was exactly what he needed. But as he drifted to sleep, the odd feeling lingered, an unsettling curiosity about the place that he couldn't shake. Little did he know his life was about to take an unexpected turn. The shack wasn't as empty as it seemed, and the real surprises were yet to come. The next morning, Charlie woke up early, feeling the warmth of the sun creeping through the cracks in the shack's walls. He stretched his arms and looked around, taking in the view of the small, dusty room he'd now called his own. The morning air was fresh, and for a moment he felt content. This was the start of something new. He grabbed his tools and decided to begin his work for the day. He spent the morning clearing away more debris from inside the shack. Old newspapers, broken furniture, and piles of dust seemed to be everywhere. With every item he tossed aside, Charlie could almost feel the potential of the place. He could see the walls coming back to life with fresh paint, the floorboards being polished until they gleamed, and a small fire crackling in the hearth, creating warmth during the cold nights. As he worked, he began to hear faint sounds coming from the back of the shack. At first it was nothing more than the wind rustling outside, but then he heard it again, a soft shuffling sound. Charlie froze, his hand still gripping the broom. He wasn't sure if his mind was playing tricks on him, but the sound was unmistakable. He put down the broom and walked cautiously toward the back room where he thought he'd been the night before. Charlie stood by the door, listening closely. There it was again. A soft sound, like someone moving quietly as though trying not to be noticed. His heart began to race. The place had seemed abandoned. So why was there noise coming from inside? He slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open just a crack. What he saw shocked him. 10 women were inside, all of them standing or sitting around a small table in the far corner. They looked up in surprise as Charlie stood frozen in the doorway. Their faces were a mix of emotions, fear, surprise, and uncertainty. Charlie felt his breath catch in his throat. He had no idea how they got there or why they were in the shack. The women looked poor, dressed in worn-out clothes. Their faces were tired, but there was a certain strength in their eyes that Charlie couldn't ignore. They didn't speak immediately, and neither did Charlie. For a moment, they just stared at each other, unsure of what to say. Finally, one of the women, an older woman with graying hair and a strong presence, stood up and walked toward Charlie. She was the first to speak. "We didn't mean to disturb you," she said softly, her voice thick with an accent. "We've been here for some time. We didn't think anyone would come." Charlie's mind was racing. He was overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of these women. "How did you—" he began, his words trailing off. He had so many questions, but no idea where to start. The older woman smiled gently, as if she understood his confusion. "We've been hiding here for months," she explained, glancing at the others. "We had no place to go, no way to survive. We found this shack and decided to stay. It was empty, and we thought it was abandoned." Charlie was still trying to process everything. He stepped further into the room, his eyes moving from one woman to another. They all seemed to share a similar story, a life of hardship, of survival, of struggle. Their faces were lined with worry, but also with a quiet resilience. It was clear that they had been through a lot, and Charlie couldn't help but feel sympathy for them. "I didn't know anyone was here," Charlie said finally, his voice softer now. "I bought this place. The woman who sold it to me didn't say anything about you." The older woman nodded. "She doesn't know we're here. We've been careful staying hidden." She paused, looking at Charlie with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. "We didn't want to cause trouble. We just needed to survive." Charlie stood there for a moment, his mind still spinning. He had come here looking for a fresh start, and now, suddenly, he found himself in the middle of a situation he never expected. But as he looked around the room at the women who were all struggling yet still holding on, something inside him shifted. He had always prided himself on doing what was right, and he knew that what was right now was helping these women. "Are you in trouble?" Charlie asked, his voice steady but concerned. The older woman looked down at the floor as if she was considering how much to say. "We are," she admitted quietly. "We've escaped from people who hurt us. We've been trying to get away from them for a long time, but it's hard. They're looking for us. They'll stop at nothing to find us." Charlie felt a pang of anger. The thought of anyone hurting these women, making them run and hide, made his blood boil. He wanted to do something to help, but he didn't know what he could do. He was just one man in a shack, miles away from anyone who could offer real protection. The older woman seemed to sense his frustration. "Please," she said, "we don't want trouble. We're not here to hurt anyone. We just need a safe place. We need to be left alone." Charlie nodded, taking a deep breath. He had to think. He couldn't turn them away, not after hearing their story. He had just bought this shack, but he had no idea what kind of trouble it might bring. Still, he knew he couldn't abandon them. "I'll help you," Charlie said finally, though his voice was filled with uncertainty. "But you need to stay out of sight. If people start asking questions, I'm going to have to tell them something." The older woman nodded gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered. "We didn't know where else to go." Charlie stepped further into the room, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. These women had been through so much already, and now they were depending on him. It was a lot to take on, but Charlie was no stranger to hard work. He had no idea how this was going to turn out, but he wasn't about to leave them to face whatever danger they had run from. As the women began to speak more about their past, their eyes brightened and Charlie listened, learning bits and pieces about their lives. He felt connected to them in a way he hadn't expected. This shack, once just a place to escape, was now a place of refuge for these women, and Charlie had become their protector, whether he was ready for it or not. But with every word, every story they shared, Charlie knew one thing for certain: life had just become a lot more complicated, and he was about to be a part of something much bigger than himself. Charlie spent the next few days in a whirlwind of activity, trying to adjust to the sudden and unexpected change in his life. He had come to the shack to escape, to find peace and solitude, but now his days were filled with concern, responsibility, and a sense of duty to the women who had found refuge in his home. He wasn't sure what exactly he was doing, but he knew that he couldn't turn his back on them. After the conversation with the women, Charlie made a decision. He would do whatever it took to protect them. He didn't have much to offer, but he could provide a safe place for them to stay. He didn't know what kind of trouble they were running from, but one thing was clear. These women had been through hell and needed a fresh start. The first thing Charlie did was to make sure that the shack was secure. He spent the next few days boarding up the windows and reinforcing the door. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He kept the place quiet, and he kept his eyes peeled for anyone who might be looking for them. Though the shack was far out of town, it wasn't entirely isolated. Charlie knew that anyone could stumble across it if they weren't careful. As the days went on, the women settled into a routine. Maria, the oldest of the group, was always up early, cooking a hearty breakfast for everyone. The younger women helped with chores, cleaning, and tending to the small garden Charlie had started outside. There was something calming about the way the women worked together, each of them taking on a role, each of them contributing to the survival of the group. Charlie found himself helping more than he had expected. At first, he was mostly focused on the repairs to the shack, but as time passed, he began to grow closer to the women. He spent evenings sitting around the fire with them, listening to their stories, hearing about their struggles and the hardships they had endured. Maria was the first to open up about their past. She explained that the women had fled from a dangerous situation, where they had been held captive by a group of men who trafficked them across the border. They had been treated as little more than property, used and abused for as long as they could remember. Maria, though older and more experienced, had spent most of her life in hiding, constantly looking over her shoulder, running from one place to the next. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," Maria said one evening, her voice soft as she stirred the pot of stew over the fire. "I thought we'd have to keep moving, that we'd never find a place to rest, to live without fear." Charlie listened in silence, his heart aching for these women. He couldn't even begin to imagine the pain they had endured, the fear they had lived with every day. But as Maria spoke, he also saw something else in her eyes, a strength that had kept them going, a determination to survive no matter the cost. The younger women were equally as strong, though their stories were still raw. One of them, named Rosa, had been separated from her family at a young age. She had never known anything but hardship, but there was a spark in her eyes, a quiet defiance that made Charlie admire her. She spoke little, but when she did, it was clear she had a wisdom beyond her years. At first, the women seemed uncertain about Charlie. They weren't sure if they could trust him, and understandably so. After all, they had been betrayed by so many people in the past. But slowly, as they saw that he was kind and genuinely wanted to help, They began to open up to him. They started to see him not just as the man who owned the shack, but as someone who cared for them, who wanted to see them thrive. As days turned into weeks, Charlie began to notice subtle changes in the women. The fear in their eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet hope. They started to smile more, to laugh, to feel a sense of normalcy again. The shack was no longer just a place to hide. It was becoming a home. But even as things seemed to be improving, Charlie knew that they were far from safe. The threat of the men who had held the women captive still loomed over them. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before someone came looking for them. And so he kept a watchful eye on the land, constantly on alert. One afternoon, as Charlie was working in the garden, he heard a car approaching. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly stood up, scanning the area for any signs of danger. He had been waiting for this moment, knowing that sooner or later someone would come. The car slowed as it neared the shack, and Charlie felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. It wasn't until the car came to a stop that Charlie saw who it was. It was a man, someone he didn't recognize, but not one of the dangerous individuals he had feared. The man stepped out of the car, looking around cautiously. He was older, dressed in worn clothes, and his face was tired, as though he had seen too much in his life. "Who are you?" Charlie asked, his voice steady but wary. The man glanced at Charlie before speaking. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice raspy. "I'm looking for some work. I heard you might be needing some help around here." Charlie studied the man for a moment. There was something about him that seemed genuine, but Charlie wasn't about to take any chances. "What kind of work are you looking for?" he asked, still cautious. The man shifted nervously but answered, "I'm good with my hands. I can help with repairs, maintenance, whatever needs to be done. I've been struggling to find steady work, but I'm willing to work hard." Charlie thought for a moment. He wasn't sure if he could trust this stranger, but he also didn't want to turn him away if he was genuinely looking for help. There was always work to be done around the shack, and if the man was willing to help, Charlie didn't see the harm in giving him a chance. "All right," Charlie said. "You can stay for a few days, but I'll need to see what you can do." The man nodded gratefully, and they shook hands. As the man started to settle in, Charlie couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. Was this just another sign of trouble coming their way, or was he simply overthinking things? As the days went by, Charlie found himself relying more and more on the man's help. The work he did around the shack was solid, and he seemed to be an honest, hard-working individual. However, Charlie remained cautious, always keeping his guard up. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was just around the corner, waiting to disrupt the fragile peace they had built. But for now, Charlie focused on what he could control: the shack, the women, and the hope that they could all build a future together. The days grew warmer as the shack continued to change. The garden outside bloomed with life, and inside the space began to feel more like a home. The women, once anxious and uncertain, had found their rhythm. Every morning they gathered together to work, some in the garden, others fixing the house, and the younger ones learning to cook. Charlie found himself adjusting to this new way of life, and though it was challenging, he felt a quiet sense of pride. Maria, the elder woman, had become a natural leader among them. Her strength and experience were evident in the way she guided the others, often offering advice and keeping everyone on task. She had taught herself to cook over the years and made sure that every meal was hearty and flavorful. Even though the shack wasn't much, the food they shared made it feel full of warmth. Rosa, one of the younger women, was quick to pick up on things, especially the gardening. She had a natural touch, and with each passing day, the garden outside began to flourish. It wasn't just vegetables they were growing. There were flowers too, adding color and life to the land. Charlie marveled at how quickly the place transformed under their care. It wasn't just the house that was changing, it was their spirits too. The routine they had built gave Charlie a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. He found joy in the small things, helping the women with repairs, taking long walks around the land with Rosa, and sharing stories with Maria about the old days. At night, they would sit around the fire, eating their meals together, and for the first time in a long while, Charlie felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. But as the days passed, a quiet tension lingered in the back of Charlie's mind. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that trouble was on the horizon. The women had been through so much, and even though they were safe for now, the world outside could easily threaten that peace. He kept a watchful eye on the road leading to the shack, always expecting someone to show up. whether it was the people they were running from or simply someone who might cause trouble. Charlie wasn't the only one who noticed the change in the atmosphere. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of work, the women gathered in the living room. It was rare for them all to be together inside, so Charlie joined them, curious about what they were planning. Maria was sitting by the fire, her face serious as she glanced at each of the women. "I think it's time we talked," Maria said softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had lived through much and learned from it. "We've been safe here for a while now, but we can't keep hiding forever. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Her words hit Charlie harder than he expected. He had known they couldn't hide forever, but hearing it spoken out loud made it feel all the more real. He looked around at the women, each of them sitting quietly, their faces a mix of determination and fear. They were all tired of being victims, but they were also afraid of what would happen if they went out into the world again. "What are you thinking?" Charlie asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety building inside him. Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude but also the weight of what they had endured. "We need to find work, Charlie. We can't keep relying on you forever. You've given us a chance, but we can't stay hidden here forever. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to learn to live again." Charlie nodded, understanding what Maria was saying. She was right. They couldn't stay in hiding for the rest of their lives. But the thought of sending them out into the world again filled him with unease. Who would hire them? Where would they go? How could they find safety and a sense of belonging in a world that had treated them so poorly? "I'll help you," Charlie said after a long pause. "I don't know what it will take, but I'll help you figure it out. We'll find a way." The women looked at each other, some with uncertainty but most with a sense of relief. They had been living in fear for so long, always looking over their shoulders. Charlie's offer gave them a glimmer of hope, something they hadn't felt in a long time. In the days that followed, Charlie and the women worked together to prepare for the next step. They started small, looking for ways to make money and learn new skills. Maria, with her experience in cooking, began making meals for local families while Rosa and the others helped with gardening and cleaning. They were taking their first steps back into the world, and each small victory felt like a triumph. Charlie continued to offer what he could. He helped them get supplies, introduced them to people in the town who might be able to help, and gave them advice on how to stay safe. Slowly, the women regained their confidence. It wasn't easy, but with each day that passed, they began to believe that they could stand on their own 2 feet. But just as they started to feel a sense of normalcy, something unexpected happened. One evening, while Charlie was out working in the field, he heard the sound of a car approaching. He looked up, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't expected anyone to be out here this time of day, and the car was moving slowly, like it was looking for something. Charlie stood still for a moment, his hand on the shovel, watching the vehicle as it got closer. It wasn't until the car stopped and the door opened that Charlie's heart stopped altogether. Out of the car stepped a man he didn't recognize, tall and weathered, with a hard look in his eyes. Charlie's instincts immediately kicked in. This was not a friendly visit. "Can I help you?" Charlie called out, his voice low and cautious. The man took a step forward, his eyes scanning the land before they landed on Charlie. "I'm looking for someone," he said, his voice gravelly. "A woman, actually. I was told she might be here." Charlie's stomach turned. He knew exactly who the man was looking for. "She's not here," Charlie replied, his voice firm, though his mind was racing. The man's gaze sharpened. "I think you're lying. I know she's here. She's one of them, isn't she?" Charlie stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know who this man was or what he wanted, but he wasn't about to let him near the women. "I think you should leave," he said, his voice steady. The man didn't move. Instead, he took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be," he warned. Charlie's mind raced. He couldn't let this man cause any more trouble. The women had already been through too much. He had to protect them no matter what, but the man wasn't backing down. Charlie's heart was pounding as the man stood there unwavering, his eyes fixed on him. The tension in the air felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Every instinct in Charlie's body screamed at him to stand his ground. He couldn't let this stranger get any closer to the shack, not when the women inside were vulnerable. He had promised to protect them, and he wasn't about to break that promise now. "Leave now, and there won't be any trouble," Charlie said, trying to keep his voice calm and controlled. though the unease was building inside him. His hands were clenched around the shovel, his mind racing. He needed to buy time, figure out how to handle the situation without escalating it. The man, however, wasn't backing down. He took another step forward, his face hardening with every movement. "I'm not leaving until I get what I came for," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're hiding something, and I'm not leaving without her." Charlie's mind raced. He could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the quiet stillness of the land, and the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The shack, the women, the quiet life he had been building, all of it felt at risk in this moment. The man's presence felt like a storm on the horizon, and Charlie knew he had to do something before things got out of hand. In a split second, Charlie made his decision. He wouldn't let this man intimidate him. He had to act fast before the situation escalated any further. "I told you to leave," Charlie repeated, his voice now carrying a firm edge. He stepped forward, keeping his body between the man and the shack. His heart was racing, but his resolve was stronger than ever. "I don't want any trouble, but if you don't leave now, I'll make sure you regret it." The man stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, it seemed like he was considering his next move, but then he laughed, low and menacing. "You're going to fight me?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You're just a farm boy. You don't know who you're dealing with." Charlie's eyes locked onto the man's, his grip on the shovel tightening. He wasn't afraid of this man. The only thing that mattered right now was protecting the women inside. The man might have been bigger, but Charlie had something the man didn't: determination and the will to protect what was rightfully his. Without another word, Charlie swung the shovel in the air, not to strike but to make a clear warning. The sound of the metal cutting through the air rang out. The man took a step back, his eyes widening with a flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected Charlie to be so forceful. "You're making a mistake," the man muttered under his breath, his confidence starting to falter. "You're going to regret this." Charlie didn't give him the chance to respond. "I've been through worse than you," he said, his voice steady and calm, though his heart raced with adrenaline. "Now leave." For a few tense seconds, the man seemed to weigh his options. It was clear that he hadn't anticipated resistance. But Charlie wasn't about to back down now. The last thing he needed was this man causing harm to anyone in the shack. The man hesitated, glancing at the land around them, as if weighing whether it was worth pursuing. Finally, with a low grunt of frustration, he turned and stalked back to his car. Charlie watched him closely, making sure the man didn't turn around to make another move. As the car started, the engine revved and it sped off down the gravel road, kicking up dust behind it. Charlie stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear into the distance. His body was still tense, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had done it. He had kept the man away, but the victory felt hollow. What if he came back? What if there were others looking for the women? Turning back toward the shack, Charlie made his way inside, his mind still racing. The women were gathered in the living room, their faces full of concern. Maria stood up as Charlie entered, her eyes searching his face for any signs of distress. "He's gone," Charlie said, his voice steady but tired. "But I don't know for how long. We need to be careful." Maria nodded solemnly, her face hardening with determination. "We've been running for too long," she said softly. "It's not safe here anymore." Charlie felt a deep ache in his chest. He had known the day would come when they couldn't stay hidden forever, but hearing Maria speak the words out loud made it feel real. The shack had been their safe haven, a place where they could breathe, start over. But it was clear now that staying there wasn't an option anymore. The threat had arrived on their doorstep. "We can't stay here much longer," Charlie said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "But I won't let anything happen to you." Maria reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "We know, Charlie. We know you've done more than we could ever ask. But it's time to move on." The reality of it all hit Charlie then. The women had come to rely on him, and he had relied on them in return. They had all become a family of sorts. He couldn't let them face whatever was coming next alone. They had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and the world outside was still dangerous. "We'll find a way," Charlie said, his voice resolute. "We'll get out of here, go somewhere safe. I don't care how long it takes, we'll get you the life you deserve." Rosa, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes shining with hope. You really think we can start over? She asked, her voice small as though she were afraid to believe it. Charlie looked around at the women, his heart swelling with determination. I know we can, he said firmly. It won't be easy, but together we'll make it. The next few days were filled with planning. Charlie spoke with a few trusted people in the nearby town, learning about possible places where they could move. He made sure to be discreet, knowing that the threat from the men who had pursued the women could be far-reaching. They needed to leave quietly without drawing attention. When the day finally came to leave the shack, Charlie felt a sense of finality. The women packed up their belongings. The small house that had once been their refuge now felt like a distant memory. The women were anxious, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. For the first time in a long time, they believed that they could build something new. As they loaded their things into the truck, Charlie couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had kept his promise. He had protected them, and now he was giving them the chance to start over. With one last look at the shack, Charlie started the engine and they drove off into the unknown. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer running. They were moving forward together. And that in itself was a victory.